Okay, so we're on. So today is, we're going to be talking about mental health awareness. We're going to be talking about some stress-related particularities with our industry and how to mitigate those. This is a state requirement. The laws have changed since the previous laws for mental health providers. So because of those law changes, they're now making this an annual requirement for training, as well as anybody who gets hired new will have to get this training. So the other classes I kind of went through, we want to know why are we here talking about this. And I started out with a little story about myself. Before I became a firefighter paramedic with the city of Dunedin, retired there, and moved on to work for the college in the EMS program for the last 2.5 years. Before that, I was with Tampa Police Department. And this was back in the day when, it was suck it up, buttercup. We don't talk about these things. It's your job. Get back on and just keep doing your job. Well, in dispatch, we were also not only call takers, but we were dispatched on the CAD system. And what's unique about 911, if you're not familiar with this, when you sit on 911 as a call taker, you don't have the opportunity to push a button. So in the city of Tampa, believe it or not, at the time, 5 people took phone calls for the whole entire city of Tampa, which meant that the phone calls did not stop over and over again. So you wore a set of earbuds, and as soon as one call was over, you got another call. Just kind of set up the story. Well, we had an incident. I was working overtime once, more than once, but I was working overtime this particular day, and we had one of the biggest incidents at the time with Tampa Police Department. And I'm not going to go into the bigger details because that will take a little bit too much time. But the details were a suspect had shot and killed his girlfriend's 4-year-old daughter. He drove him, or son, drove him to the fire station, dropped him off at the fire station, injury unsurvivable. The 2 detectives that became involved with the call were murdered by this person, as well as an FHP trooper. And he eventually took his own life, allegedly. Took his own life. But this particular call kind of rocked Tampa Police at the time because this was a wide incident. We had Pinellas County, Pasco County, Hernando County, Temple Terrace Police, Tampa Police, FHP, Tampa Fire. We were all involved and embedded in this call. But what was unique about this, at a time when it was suck it up, buttercup, do your job, we all came together as a community care. We were all allowed to be angry about it. We were all allowed to cry. I saw grown men on the SWAT team break down in tears, but it was okay. It was okay to say these things and be angry. Well, another incident similar happened, but it was to an individual dispatcher who happened to take a call on a day, a typical call. It was a police-assisted suicide. We took those kind of calls all the time. She stayed on the phone with the suspect who had a knife, and it was a payphone back in the days when we had payphones. And she was begging him to put the knife down, and he didn't, and the officers shot and killed him. But she was on the phone the whole time with it. And I remember after the call, she kind of put her head down on the desk and sobbed. But the calls didn't stop for her. She had to keep taking one call after another. And this was seriously in a time where it was like we looked at her and went, really? Just do your job. Get back on there, take some more calls. This is nothing new. Keep on going. What's wrong with you? She went out on mental leave, and we kind of ostracized her. We kind of picked at her, and she didn't do very well compared to the other experience where we allowed to say it was okay to be angry. It was allowed to be okay to cry. With her, we said basically suck it up, buttercup. And that's where it comes into that community of care, because there's been longevity studies showing that when we all come together as a unit and we take care of each other, peer support, because we're going to talk a little bit about peer support, that it helps mitigate some of that PTSD, some of that anxiety and depression. They did a study back post 9/11, a longevity study. We're going on many years now, and depending on what study you look at, anywhere between 12 and 30% actually came down with diagnosed PTSD. And you would think that with such a large traumatic incident as that was, that 100% of those people who were proximal to the incident would come down with some kind of anxiety or depression. But they found that it didn't happen And a couple of things that they looked at was the community of care, that as a nation we were allowed to grieve. We were allowed to say it was bad. We were allowed to say I'm angry and sad. We took care of each other and talked about the incident. And there was a lot of resiliency and coping mechanisms in place for those who didn't. So we're going to talk about some of those. So before we get started, I'd like to show this video. If you've seen the video, just kind of go with it. If you haven't, it'll give you the instructions of what to do.
The monkey business illusion. Count how many times the players wearing white pass the ball. The correct answer is 16.
Did you guys see the 16? Okay. See anything else?
Passes. Did you spot the gorilla?
Did you guys see the gorilla?
For people who haven't seen or heard about a video like this before, about half missed the gorilla. If you knew about the gorilla, you probably saw it. But did you notice the curtain changing color or the player on the black team leaving the game? Let's rewind and watch it again. Here comes the gorilla, and there goes a player, and the curtain is changing from red to gold. When you're looking for a gorilla, you often miss other unexpected events. And that's the monkey business illusion. Learn more about this illusion and the original gorilla experiment at theinvisiblegorilla.com.
Okay, so no, this is not. There we go. So, did you guys see the gorilla, honestly? The second time. I didn't see it the first time either. I like to play this video for when I was teaching at the college, the EMT students and the new medic students, and anybody I got in my department who is new for scene safety issues. But we can kind of like put this in this perspective as well for mental health, because we get so tunnel visioned on sometimes what our particular, problems are, or we get tunnel visioned on one particular aspect of life that we forget to take the blinders off and see what's really going on, and we miss the gorilla in the room. So I thought it was kind of a fun little video. I missed the gorilla the first time too. I was like, oh my God, how did I miss that thing walking in there? So here's the learning objectives. The learning objectives is we're going to review some stressors associated with the medical services. We're going to discuss some symptoms and reactions. We're going to talk about some activities for promoting crew mental health and wellness. And we're going to talk about stress first aid. Part of what I think the problem with my friend Debbie at dispatch is we didn't know, first of all, we kind of recognized that she was in crisis, but really didn't absorb that, didn't process that. And then what do you say to somebody who's in crisis? What do you actually say? How do you start that conversation? And how can you get them some help if they need some help? And at the end of this, I'm going to give you some brochures and some cards that you can keep that has some good resource numbers that you can utilize. So if somebody could define for me what you think a critical incident is. Death of a baby? I'm sorry? Fellow crew member? Okay. That's what a critical incident is, but what do you think, like, the definition of, other than just the actual incident, what happens to you during a critical incident that would define it for you as a critical incident?
Something that you can't stop thinking
Close. Good. You're on the right track. Because we all act at critical incidents differently. Some people will have a reaction. Some people won't have a reaction. Everybody, it varies between person to person. But what is defined, the actual definition of this, is a stressful event that challenges one's ability to cope and adapt. And it doesn't mean that you lose your ability to cope and adapt all the time. This is transient. So anything that can cause that undue stress on you. So stressors. A stressor is anything that stimulates, causes, evokes, or otherwise is strongly associated with a stress response. Any events or conditions that may cause psychological or behavioral reactions which present coping difficulties for the individual experiencing them. And once again, this is an individual thing, and not all stressors are bad. You have good stressors. And if you have right resiliency, right coping mechanisms, under the right circumstances, stress can be good. So, for instance, do you guys have kids? No? No kids? Pets? Pets? Bills? Teenagers? No, little ones. So just those things right there can be stressful, but it's not necessarily bad. Stress can actually prepare you to handle bigger events, and it's called stress inoculation. And there's lots of studies talking about, with children, giving them a little bit of stressors, a little bit of failures under the right circumstances and right coping mechanisms actually can prepare them better for adulthood. So there are some stress on the body. As we know, I heard you guys are all really good, smart clinicians. So as you know, when we have a stress or we have a critical incident, we have something that taxes our system, we have an endogenous catecholamine release. We have two of those catecholamines. What are they? Norepi and epinephrine. Sorry? So it's preparing, our body's preparing for that fight or flight mechanism, right? So what effects would you think those two catecholamines on that fight or flight mechanism would have for your musculoskeletal system? What would it do to your musculoskeletal? Tenses up. So you have some vasoconstriction on the inside, the core. You have some vasodilation on the hands and feet to prepare you to either run or fight. You're going to tense up. You're going to be prepared, right? What effects would it have on your respiratory system? It's definitely going to increase it. Can cause you to, in some circumstances, hyperventilate, which can cause some numbness and tingling to your feet. Cardiovascular system, what effects would it have on your cardiovascular system? Heart rate, right? Raise the blood pressure. Endocrine system, we're going to talk a little bit more in detail about the endocrine system. What about your GI tract? Well, you're getting ready for fight or flight, so if you have any food, it's going to shut, your GI tract is going to stop. It's going to cause you, there's millions of neurons in that stomach area. It's going to cause that tensing up, that knotting of the stomach, maybe some of that, what we described as butterfly feeling. Then you have your nervous system. So your nervous system is going to send that stimulus response. You get that flight or fight response. It's going to send out the stimulus to the rest of the body to prepare you to either run or fight. Reproductive system. What do you think the effects on the reproductive system, especially with chronic stress and chronic critical incidents? So I worked in Pinellas County. In Pinellas County, we had 18 different fire departments and a Sunstar private ambulance provider. And we went to annual physicals. We did it through LifeScan, and we had annual blood work. And once we all were on the same schedule of doing an annual physical, we found, particularly in males, well, not in the females, but in males, and even in their 20s, we're not talking about the 40 and 50, they were having systemically problems with low T count. And there's studies showing that stress erratic sleep schedules, chronic stress can cause your testosterone levels to lower. So half of the departments were all on steroids. And for female, chronic stress can actually reduce chances of reproduction. So let's talk about the endocrine system, because it's kind of like the ringleader in all this. It actually coordinates that fight or flight. And it's done on the HPA axis, which is your hypothalamic, pituitary, adrenal axis. So you have that stimulus, which affects your hypothalamus. The hypothalamus releases a catecholamine, or a neurotransmitter, to your pituitary. Your pituitary and then releases to your adrenal cortex, which sits on the anterior part of the kidneys. And what steroid would it release? It's called the stress steroid. It releases cortisol. You heard of cortisol, right? So cortisol is not a bad thing. We hear this negative talk about cortisol, but cortisol actually helps prepare us in a temporary situation for that fight or flight. So it utilizes the glucose in our system to produce energy, and it keeps us acutely aware and alert. But it works on a negative feedback system, meaning that once the cortisol levels are high and there's no more outside stimulus to stimulate that fight or flight, the hypothalamus recognizes the cortisol levels are high, and then it lowers them. But what happens when we're under that constant stress, that feedback mechanism becomes overtaxed. And now we have that excessive release of cortisol all the time, and that's what causes those issues like diabetes, hypertension, high blood pressure, and that's when you're always on that hyperacute level. So if I was to ask you some definitions, if the first thing that comes to your mind, if I say, what is trauma to you? And the first thing that comes to my mind is physical trauma. Somebody getting hit with a baseball bat, or an MVC, or somebody falling down, or you cut your finger, or whatever the case may be. I think of the first thing I think is physical. But there is another set of trauma, and that's psychological or mental trauma. And we may not be experiencing physical trauma, but by sheer position of our job, we definitely are exposed to whether it's vicarious trauma from our patients, or we're actually experiencing those traumas ourselves. So just keep it back in mind when we're talking about trauma or vicarious trauma, we're talking about the emotional trauma. Okay, so consolidating memories. So I don't know if you guys hear about it or listen to when we talk about the reoccurring nightmares from, especially when we have our vets coming back from the military theater and suffering from post-traumatic stress. One of the things is they have these vivid memories of the incidences. So how the memory kind of works, you have that experience, you have that outside stimulus, it goes into your short-term memory, and once it goes into the short-term memory, there are some proteins that go through some protein synthesis that helps bind it and transport it to your long-term memory. Kind of puts it on the shelf for later use. Like when I talk about the incident at Tampa Police, I can kind of talk about that without having a physiological response. I don't have any nightmares about it. It's not a vivid. It's put on my shelf, so when I need to talk about it and talk about the incident, it's there. But when we have traumatic stress over and over, that consolidation process gets kind of stuck, and we're not able to consolidate those memories into our long-term memories so we can pull it out later to use. So once again, why are we talking about this? Well, we have protective laws for us. We have the firefighter bill of rights, we have presumptive illness laws, we have a new cancer bill, we have the heart and lung bill, and now we have a mental health bill. And the reason we're doing this is we know that because of our job, we are 4 to 5 times more likely than the general public to experience traumatic events. It doesn't mean that we're all going to come down with PTSD. It doesn't mean that we're all going to have depression, anxiety, or substance abuse. It just means that you need to be aware, just like we have awareness for the cancer. I know when I first started in this business, we would leave our helmets black because that was a badge of honor, because we knew that we had a fire. In fact, some of the crew members who didn't get fires would go put their helmet in the barbecue grill so it looked like they had a fire. we used to put our bunker gear in the cab, so when I'm coming through the next day, would smell the smoke and go, we could brag to them what we had a fire. We know that is causing cancer. So, we talk now about cancer awareness. We've put some policies in place to help prevent that. So this is why the state's now requiring this awareness level and to help put policies to make us aware that we are exposed to this. And how do we mitigate that? You guys seen this movie? Bringing Out the Dead? You guys never seen this movie? That's great. When you're in your downtime, watch this movie. This is a great example. Nicolas Cage is in this. Tom Sizemore's in it, as well as John Goodman. And there's different levels of PTSD. Now, Nicolas Cage has got PTSD. He had a call where, there was an asthmatic homeless girl who was 13 who he couldn't save, and she kind of haunts him through this. And this is like a traumatic comedy, so it's a lot of funny parts, but it also kind of brings to light some of the stuff that we go through, particularly in EMS or fire service, that can cause post-traumatic. So he handles it one way, which is really maladaptive and very destructive for him. Then he has his other partner, Tom Sizemore, who's also suffering from PTSD, but he handles it a completely different way. Like I said, it's a kind of a tragic comedy, but it's funny anyway. But it brings to light how you can have these different responses. So in this movie too, and you guys work for a private ambulance company ever? No? I worked for AMR, and there's one scene in here that he goes into the boss and he says, "You promised you'd fire me today," and the boss goes, "I'll fire tomorrow, kid, just get back on the ambulance, we need you." So I was like, yeah, that's my AMR days. So what are you guys think, some of the stressors associated with working in the EMS services, particular to our job, some of the stressors? Sleep, that's like my number one response to everybody gets. What else? Ups and downs? Tones going off, yeah. What else? What's that? Bad calls, yeah. Exactly. Yep. How many birthdays you missed and holidays you missed. What happens when you get called to a natural disaster? Hurricanes come in and you have to leave your family behind and go to work and not worry about them. Yeah, that's not going to happen. So there's lots of different stressors associated particularly with our job. And we come in with our own personal baggage. We have bones in our closet. We have life experience. And then our particular job just can add to that. So we're going to name a couple of what those stressors are. So we have our physical, which we have fatigue, which once again, that's the number one thing, fatigue and exhaustion, long work hours and erratic hours, excessive heat. You can't help that. This is Florida. I don't think any profession in Florida gets away from that. Exposure to unpredictable physical danger and violence. This is getting more and more prevalent in our field. In fact, they had just released a video of that fire medic, I can't remember, I think he was in Wisconsin, where he responded to a bus, unresponsive person on a bus. They gave him some Narcan. He was trying to talk him into going to the hospital. The patient then pulled out a gun and started shooting. The fire medic was killed. A bystander was shot and survived. An officer was shot and he survived. But we have no idea when that's coming. It catches by surprise, so that's part of adding to the stress. Cross-cultural differences between responders and the community. Community still has no idea what we do. Have you guys ever been accosted at the store for buying groceries? No? Happened to us all the time. We'd go to the store, we're at Publix on duty, shopping during our daily shopping when we're on duty, and they would come up to us and say, how dare you buy food on my tax dollar? We're like, what? We're paying for this out of our own pocket. We're at the station 24 hours, and they're like so confused. They're like, you stay at the station 24 hours? Like, yeah. So that can be a little bit stressful. And then we have stressors that are emotional, and that is encounters with violent death or human remains. And even though that we kind of see that all the time and we kind of build up that somewhat of that immunity, sometimes there are those buckets of scars that you keep with you, and that bucket can get full. Repeated exposure to vicarious trauma or injury, exposure to survival guilt or terror, shame, inability to connect with loved ones, separation from loved ones, and personal loss. And that personal loss can be financial, or it can be, your pet. This is personal loss. So I want to throw out a couple of terms, and if you could help me define them. What do you think the definition of compassion is compared to empathy? So you guys are close, you're on the right track. The actual Latin term for compassion is with pain. So compassion, and we talk a lot about, we intermix those words a lot, but actually having compassion for something or someone means you're taking on their pain. That's the vicarious exposures, And we really can't be effective in our job if we're feeling somebody's pain. And when you constantly seeing these traumas or this stuff happening to people, the underbelly of the world, we start to get compassion for them and start feeling their pain, and that's when we talk about compassion fatigue or burnout. Empathy is more like, I understand what you're going through. It's not my emergency. I can understand it, and I'm going to do the best job I can to help you because I understand what you're going through, and I'm going to help you. That's the difference between empathy and compassion. So we want to remain empathetic, but we want to try to stay away from actually starting to feel people's pain. I have another term for you. No, there's mentions it later on as well. What do you think the definition of moral injury is? Moral injury.
You do something that wasn't right.
You could. That's part, yeah. That potentially could happen. Moral injury. Right, or seeing something that goes against your belief. Each one of us, we see this a lot with military guys. They go off to war and they have to do stuff that necessarily goes against their spiritual, religious, moral beliefs. We all have some kind of moral compass, for lack of better terms. We all come with a set of ethos, we all come with a set of values, and we all have a set of morals. They're all different, right, wrong, or different. When we go out and we see these things happening to people, good people doing bad things, or good people, having bad things happen to them, or you go out and see that child abuse, or you go out and see that somebody that's shooting up fentanyl and hurting themselves, or you go off to the military and you're having to see war atrocities or have to actually fight somebody, that can cause us moral injury. And that adds to the overall picture of, those traumatic stresses that add to our potential. So some cognitive stresses, you over-identify with the victims or survivor, and that's where we're going from feeling empathetic to getting that compassion or feeling their pain. Time pressures, doesn't matter what, this job or any job or just life in general, time pressures are always there. It seems like we just don't have enough time in the day. High workload intensity. From what I understand, your guys' call volume just keeps getting up and up, and the workload does not seem to be relief in sight. Human errors or perceived mission failures. I know for myself, I'm a type A personality, and if I perceive I've made a mistake, I will play that mistake over and over again in my head, and that can add to some cognitive overload. Difficult making choices or decisions. So me and my husband did the whole spouse thing. We played the game of, hey, honey, what do you want for dinner? I don't care. It doesn't matter to me. Well, how about some chicken? No, I really don't want chicken, right? That's not this. There has been a time where I've come home, especially working at the college. I had 200 students. They were out on the road 24/7. Very stressful job. made decisions all day long. So I'd come home and say, listen, I have no more decisional capacity. I'm on decisional overload. I cannot make any more decisions. I don't care. We're not playing the spouse game with what we want to eat. I don't care if you make me a peanut butter and jelly sandwich. Just make me something and I'll eat it and I'll be happy. That is cognitive stress. Lack of training or practice. I've been on the SISM team for 20 years. The most common thing I get from when they have bad calls is I shoulda, woulda, coulda. I wish I had gotten into that Broslo bag. Since last time I got into that Broslo bag was a year ago in training, and I haven't looked at it since. Now that I had this bad pediatric call, I really wish I trained on it more. Whether it's perceived or not, that can weigh heavy on somebody, causing cognitive stress. Some organizational or operational stressors. You have the intense need for information. If you don't get the whys, it causes a little bit of stress. Ineffective communication, whether it was your crew members or with command staff. Lack of team cohesion, equipment failures, or any kind of barriers off or on work. So we talked about what a critical incident was. We talked about what the stressors can do, what the stressors are, and what they can do. So what do you think if you had a critical incident, what do you think some common stress reactions would be to a critical incident? Common stress reactions. Anger? Yeah. Quiet. Isolation. Okay. What else? What, fatigue? Mm-hmm. Okay. 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 Exactly. Everyone is different. So we have a wide variety. And I used to think sometimes, why am I not bothered by this? Because everybody else seems to be bothered by it. I feel like I'm okay. And that's okay too. Just because you don't have a reaction doesn't mean there's something wrong. But what we like to say in the SISM is you are having potentially a reaction, a normal reaction to an abnormal event. A normal reaction to an abnormal event. And we'll talk about those reactions. First are some physical reactions. And the number one thing I get over and over is fatigue. Insomnia. I thought if I retired and I slept in my own bed at night that I would be able to get some sleep. I have terrible insomnia. I've worked shift work my whole entire adult working life. So insomnia is a big one. Either lack of appetite or wanting to eat too much. GI issues, tension headaches, and startle response. Let me talk a little bit more about that startle response because it's kind of interesting. So, do you guys remember the plectrons? Did you have plectrons? Plectron days? You probably haven't. So these plectrons were just these super loud, like I can't even describe that tone. And the lights would come on super bright, and then dispatch would go off. So my department decided when they built a new station to go to a nice, kinder, gentler, subtle tones. And they did this wonderful thing where they would, before the tones would go off, the lights would go from dark to dim, gently come up to a nice level where you could see to get to the apparatus without hurting yourself. And then the voice tones would start out really low, and it was really melodic, and it would basically sing you awake. But right before those would go off, because you kind of knew the call was coming, is there would be a click of the light switch. It was just a little subtle click, and then you knew those nice melodic tones would be going off. It was all well and good until I realized after many years of this that my husband, who worked as a firefighter too on a different shift, he would try to get out of bed nice and quiet, and he would keep the lights off, and he would gently get out of bed, and he would tiptoe to the bathroom, and he would quietly close the door. But as soon as he clicked on the light, I heard that light switch go off, and I would sit straight up and go, oh my God, I got a call, and then be totally confused of where I was and realize I'm at home. I just had that big adrenaline dump, and now I'm not getting back to sleep. So those little startle reflexes can stay with you for a while. Okay, typical critical incident reactions through emotionally. We talked about, you mentioned anger and guilt, the shoulda, woulda, couldas, isolation, and actually feeling afraid. Cognitively, we're talking about depression, some potential for bad dreams or nightmares, some memory loss or disassociation, and feeling of overwhelming. So there are some potential incapacitating physical reactions that I'm going to show you guys a video, and you're going to see the extreme version of somebody under critical stress. But some of those would be some tunnel vision or muffled hearing, fatigue, gastrointestinal upset, headaches, hypertension, chest pains, panic attacks. Emotional, we're talking about feeling of hopelessness, loss of joy, low self-esteem, inability to balance between empathy and objectivity, persistent fear, anxiety, extreme emotional numbing, burnout, compassion fatigue, and guilt. Cognitively, we're talking about the difficulty to remember or making those decisions, disorientation or confusion. And in the video I'm going to show you, you're going to definitely see some of that disorientation. Diminished sense of self, unrealistic expectations, prolonged disassociation, suicidal or homicidal thoughts. And then we go to the behavior side with uncontrolled anger, hostility, relationship problems, blaming others, substance abuse, persistent sleep disturbance, social withdrawal, and even workaholism. And then there's some of the physical, being the hypertension, the cardiovascular, the diabetic, the muscle tension, skin rashes, and exacerbation of medical conditions. So any mental health clinician, whether it be a mental health counselor, a psychiatrist, psychologist, all make decisions of diagnosis through the DSM-V, and this is the newest one, the latest one, the number 5. And what the changes has said is that if you've had any one of these sentinel events, such as direct experience with a traumatic event, witnessing traumatic event in person, you learn of a traumatic event that from a close family member, or you've had firsthand or repeated exposure to extreme traumatic events, one of those sentinel events would qualify you to be possibly diagnosed with PTSD, and then there's some symptomology that goes with that, which now they have made this a big blanket statement which covers anxiety and depression. And the reason this is important is because they did change the law, and there's a link to that law, and I'll also give it to you in a handout because it's important, I think, for you to know your rights. It used to be PTSD was only diagnosed, and for workers' compensation issues, is if you had a physical injury that caused you to have PTSD, a physical injury on the job that caused you PTSD. Now they're saying that if you had any one of those qualifying events that I just read to you in the DSM-V-5, and you're diagnosed by a doctor having PTSD, you could now be compensated and covered and protected under that new law. So once again, to stress that just because we're exposed to this does not mean that we are going to get PTSD. It does mean that we have a potential of having acute reactions or coming down with PTSD. So it's important to know the difference. So acute stress reaction varies by individual. We kind of talked about this. It's all individual. It can have multiple different types of symptoms, but it's usually transient. It goes away, maybe hangs around with you for about a month. But after that, it's put away on that shelf. That long-term, short-term memory is now consolidated to long-term memory. Post-traumatic stress usually begins with the first 3 months after the trauma, although there may be a delay of months or years. Symptoms is more than a month. So if you're having these reoccurring symptoms and you can't get them by your normal coping mechanisms, then that's the point in time when you need to seek help. And there's quite a bit of therapy out there. So there is, they just had a new breakthrough that's going to be approved through the FDA. It's called SGA, I believe. It's where they inject your gangliotic nerve through your neck, and they kind of do some kind of numbing of that, and they've had really good results from military vets with severe post-traumatic stress, this relief is instantaneous and can last up to 6 months. So that's on the extreme end. On the preventative end, there's stuff like good evidence showing yoga. I'm not a big yoga person. It's too meditative and too quiet for me. I like to do stuff active. But they show that there's some really good research saying that yoga helps prevent PTSD. There's also guided imagery, there's cognitive behavioral therapy, there's EDMR, and there's also medications. So what I want to emphasize is that, we talked about this, we know that we're exposed to it, but really we have good protective factors built in. You guys I think that people in our profession are very resilient as it is. We wouldn't be able to do our jobs if we weren't resilient. So we have those protective factors built in. But once again, we have those bucket of scars that can build up over a long period of time. And if we can't figure out how to empty those cups and put good stuff into it, that's when that cup becomes overloaded and we can have these problems. So they're showing that peer support, we are our best resource here. But I want to caution you on some things. We do a good job of getting in the cab after a call and talking about the incident, right? Hopefully you guys, especially if it's a bad call, if it's one of those kick calls, we talk about it. We go to the station, we kind of hot wash. They call it a hot wash. We sit around the table and sometimes we just sit around the table and go back to our normal routine and we have our gallows humor to deal with it, that dark humor. But just be cautious, especially when you're talking about somebody who's been in the business a long time and may have that bucket of scars full, or somebody who's new to the business who's trying to fit in. And we're sitting around the table, laughing and kind of doing our thing, and they're really kind of suffering in silence because they don't want to say anything, because they don't want to be a misfit. They want to fit in with the crew. And it may be their first cardiac arrest. It might be your 100th cardiac arrest, but it might have been their first. Or if you have somebody that's, this is their 100th cardiac arrest, but they just lost their grandmother, and that person may have reminded them of their grandmother or grandfather, they may be sitting suffering in silence because they're afraid to say something. And so here's kind of my little soapbox. I think it's better to be better than to have to get better. And instead of calling it mental health, we should call it mental wellness. And so some of my suggestions that I've made that hopefully I can get some feedback on this, is we're really good. You guys have your own PCPs. I'm sure I have my own PCP provider. And what happens if you don't like your PCP? Just find another one, right? Right? But how do you know if you don't go to them, right? So you have to go get and hopefully you get an annual checkup. I know you guys are going to go to life scan, so you're going to get an annual checkup. But you should be doing an annual checkup. You shouldn't be going to your doctor when you're feeling at your worst, because they need to get a baseline. You need to establish that rapport. You need to make sure that he's a good doctor, right? I think the same thing should be said for mental health, because one of the pushbacks or feedback that I get, not from just here, but once again, Pinellas County had 18 fire departments. I've gone and spoke on this topic at some big conferences. And one of the things that I get is, well, they don't know our job. And I went to one once, and I told them about, first it took me 3 visits to even get them to figure out what our job was. And then I told them about some of the calls I had that really wasn't bothering me. I just wanted to tell them about some of these calls. And I ended up having to do, PTSD on them because they were crying in the corner. So it would be nice, though, if you developed a relationship with somebody when you're feeling at your baseline, when you're feeling well, and just have a wellness checkup, a mental health wellness checkup once a year, just to say, hi, how's it going? Here's what's going on in my life. And they get to know you, you get to know them, you feel comfortable with them. And there are different types of providers out there. So mental health is just a big blanket statement, but there are specialties. So you have people that specialize in family, people that specialize in substance abuse, and then people who also specialize in trauma. They're certified trauma. And I just met a lady about 3 weeks ago, who takes all her grad students to Israel and works with the Israeli army at the hospital. And talk about being trauma certified, those people would definitely have an understanding of what we do. EAP is a resource, but once again, it's not something to be used in crisis, if you're in crisis mode, but if it's something that you want to make an appointment, start early. Keep the phone number. I heard that you can register online with Target Solutions and already be pre-registered. But once again, if you're talking about depression or anxiety or possible PTSD, when you call them, make sure you ask for a trauma-certified clinician, and they can steer you in the right direction. Peer support. Peer support is designed to help mitigate the situation. Like I said, we are the best resource for our own people. It helps reduce emotional stress, provides advice on self-care. Like I said, we at the SISM team, we always came in armed with a set of stuff to help mitigate some coping mechanisms, suggestions. And we also should be able to identify, like, okay, this is beyond just me and you having a cup of coffee talking about something that's going on. Maybe it's time to give you some other resources for some help. So what is stress first aid? It is recognition of an individual who is reacting in a wide variety of stressors. And once again, I'm going to show you a video of an extreme version of somebody in crisis. And in that video, it's going to show what some of his colleagues did to help. It's an intervention or promotion of healing from stress reactions. It's a team-based approach, and it came from the military. Why do we need it? It's a busy system. Once again, it's according to the statistics, we are 4 to 5 times more exposed than the general population to traumatic stresses. Here's some stats that I took from your website. Prevention starts with us, and awareness and education is the first step for prevention. And here's kind of a stress model. And in the stress model, we typically, in a daily basis, we can go from green to yellow to, we want to stay out of the orange, and we definitely want to stay out of the red. The red is going to be our injury. So, but we typically go back in a normal day between green and yellow. And in the greens, we want to stay in a green. And in a green, it's defined as you're optimally function, you are open to adaptive growth and wellness. It features you're at your best, you're well trained and prepared, you're mission focused, motivated, you're clean and steady, calm and steady, you're having fun, which probably you're not in the green right now because I know this is probably not fun, but you're behaving ethically. So maybe you're going between a little bit of green and yellow. In the yellow, it's caused by any stressors. It's defined as mild and transient. It always goes away, and it's very low risk. It features feeling a little bit irritable, anxious, or down. You may have a little bit of difficulty sleeping or lack of focus, not having any fun, and you may have some other physical changes. Orange, now we're talking about a little bit of injury. Is caused by life threats, loss, moral injury, wear and tear. It's defined as being more severe and persistent. It leaves a scar, and it puts you at higher risk. But here's the problem. So we're going to talk about filling our cup with everyday stressors and how that cup can now overflow. And then we're going to talk about stuff that we can put into our cup for gratitude to make it fill with good stuff. So causes stress, wear, and tear. In the bottom of the cup, we already start daily with bills. If you don't have any bills, good for you. I know the last time I didn't have any bills, I was probably 19 years old living at home with my parents with a junky old car that was paid for. But we start with stuff in our cup already with bills. And then you add normal daily stress of traffic, or it could be the normal daily stress of your kids, or normal daily stress of having to walk your dog puked on the floor, or whatever the case may be. That's starting to fill that bottom of your cup. Overtime could be good or bad. Depends. If you get too much overtime, you spend it away from your kids. If you really want the overtime, then you could put in that lack of overtime. You guys work second jobs? Good for you for not. Don't get into that habit, but you used to. And most people in our profession, for some reason, my husband works 4 jobs. Somebody made fun of me the other day. He goes, they probably don't realize you're even moved out of the house because he still lives on the other coast. So he works at the fire academy, he works at the college teaching EMS program, he teaches CMEs for the county, and he also has his fire job. Some stresses that can be caused from inner conflict, that can be, cheating. It could be stuff that you've done at work, medication errors, maybe you got gigged for something wrong with your report, whatever the case may be, whatever job issues. And then we're adding possible religious conflicts, love conflicts, political conflicts. These are almost everyday things. And then we have grief due to loss, and that could be a loss of a spouse's job, it could be a loss of a pet, it could be loss of an income, it could be loss of a home, any type of loss. Career-ending injury. I kind of want to stop and talk a little bit about those career-ending injuries, just so we're talking about peer support. If you have somebody that goes out on just an injury and goes into light duty, happened to me. I had a pretty significant injury on the training ground, and it caused me to be out of work for 6 weeks. And my department thought it would be kind of funny to put me at light duty shredding paper for 8 hours. So for 5 days a week, 8 hours a day, six weeks, I shred paper. And I kind of joked with my friend Mary, who does the suicide prevention. I called her up. I said, you know what? You need to add this to your suicide prevention because I really want to kill myself right now. And I was being facetious. I really didn't. But it was so horrible and so demeaning and so depressing that they, and my station was just like this station where, my crew was attached to fire admin. So I heard my crew going out on calls, and I really wanted nothing more to be back on the job. And it was really kind of depressing. Another incident happened with my friend who worked for Osmar Fire Department, and he actually had a career-ending injury. He tore his shoulder, and his second job was he owned a landscaping company. So not only did he lose his fire job, he lost his second income, and he defined himself by this job. So all he wanted to do is be a firefighter. It's all he talked about was being a firefighter. He wore all the big buckles. He had the license plates. He had everything associated with a firefighter. Well, when he lost his job, he sat at home and kind of detached himself from his colleagues at work. And then his marriage started falling apart. And on Valentine's Day, they got into a big fight, and he shot and killed himself in front of his wife. So if you know one of your crew members are out on those injuries, I know sometimes they don't want to, but try to reach out to them and take care of them, because it is nothing more demoralizing and demeaning or depressing to be identified, and then now all of a sudden you're not, and it's not something you wanted to happen. Death of a family member, colleague. Now we're adding our cup is running over, so now we're adding those extreme calls where you have the death of a child, you have a weapon pulled on you, you go to a child abuse call, or you have a near-death experience. And now you end up potentially in the red. And the red is now we're talking about injury, where now you're having PTSD, depression, anxiety, substance abuse, and those symptoms persist and get worse over time and don't go away. So give me some thoughts of what you guys personally do to empty that cup and to fill it up with good stuff. Like, what are you grateful for? Family time. What are you grateful for? You like to fish? Fishing? Do you like to eat the fish after you catch it? Do you like to clean the fish? No, that's gross. What else? So family and fishing. What's that? Vacations? Working out. So we need to kind of change the philosophy a little bit. We talk about always embrace the suck. Embrace the suck. And we talk about embracing the suck, and we talked about that at the college a lot. We would tell our students, which now I'm looking back at it, was probably not a good thing. Yeah, paramedic school sucks, but just embrace the suck. But instead of saying embrace the suck, we need to think of what we do for gratitude, what we do to refill our cup with good stuff. How do we decompress and empty all that bad crap out and fill it with good stuff? Because realistically, we can't pour from an empty cup. When we give, we're givers, we're helpers. That's our nature. If somebody, Mary talks about her brother who jumped off the bridge to commit suicide. She said if somebody would have broke down and needed a change of a tire, was such a giver that he probably would have changed that person's tire first before he jumped over the bridge, or that might have saved his life because he's such a giver. But we can't give from an empty cup, so we need to figure out how to fill it with good stuff and what we're grateful for. So a good way of starting the day is, even having conversations with your children. What made you happy today? What are you grateful today? What are you doing to de-stress yourself? So those are natural, built-in coping skills that also helps build resiliency to keep you out of this red. And I love Paul Combs, and I love his cartoons. I think they're really meaningful. To me, if you see somebody in distress or you think they're going to commit suicide, it's better to say something to them and be wrong than to not say something and be silent. And the same goes for yourself. So my friend from Osmar who sat at home alone, feeling bad, did not reach out and say, I need some help. I need to figure out how to help myself, because when you're in this situation, you can't get out. You can't rescue yourself. So there are some things we can do to help mitigate this. And they call it the 7 C's of stress first aid. The first step starts with just simply check on them. Are you okay? Actually, that's a bad terminology, so Mary talks about that. Because most of the time when you say, are you okay, what's the first thing you're going to say? I'm fine. I'm fine. There's nothing wrong with me. Another better response would say, I think you think you're fine, but here's what I see. Here's why I don't think you're really fine. So you make sure that regardless of it saying, listen, I'm fine, it's okay to say, you may believe that, and I truly think you believe you're fine, but here's what I'm seeing. You want to coordinate. It means to get help and refer as needed. So there might be some times when it's beyond you or you don't understand what they're going through. It's okay to hook them up with somebody who may understand, who've had a like experience. Cover. You want to get them to safety ASAP. You want to calm, so you want to relax them. You want to slow them down. If they're hyperventilating, you want to get them to relax. You want to connect, so connect them with others, whether it be chaplain, a mental health provider, another peer who may has more experience in the situation. You want to restore effectiveness by increasing their confidence. So once the situation's over and they come back to work, you want to give them small little victories to restore their confidence as well as their confidence. So we need to have these discussions and break that stigma of mental health and break that stigma of suck it up buttercup, or break that cycle, which starts here by being a big brother, a big sister. Don't let anybody suffer in silence. And once again, it's better to say something and be wrong than to not say something and be right and let somebody suffer in silence. So there's some action steps we can do. Like, what do we do to help this person? We recognize they're in stress. We recognize the stressors. We recognize that they had a critical incident stress. What can we do to help? And the first goal is to stabilize the situation. You want to reduce emotional distress. Once the situation is over and they're receptive to listening, then you can provide some advice on self-care. Part of our CISM package that we come in with would be some handouts that gave some educational what they can do to get back on their feet. So for instance, if my stress relief is going out for a run, then go out for a run. If your stress relief is sitting on the patio with a glass of wine with your cats watching the sunset, then that's your stress relief. It becomes maladaptive when that running becomes a 5-mile run to becoming over excessive running every single day. Or that one glass of wine turns into, 3 bottles of wine. So that's when it becomes maladaptive. So our goal is to engage with them. And once again, I'm going to give you some simple things just to open up that communication, to talk to them by simply saying, hello, my name is, can I help you? Can I ask you some questions? Can we talk about this? Explain that you are there to help. Identify any barriers or limitations to communication. And then employ behaviors to effectively communicate. So my husband hates when I do this, but two things. This is comfortable and I'm cold. But if you're having a conversation with somebody, that's probably that comfort might be for you, but that sometimes relays that closed offness, because that's what he accuses you. Is you're mad or you're just being closed off? I'm like, no, I'm just cold. But when you're having a conversation with somebody, it's best to try to have an open stance, get eye to eye with them, ask a few open-ended questions, and then just be quiet and let them talk. And then sometimes, on the right moments, you're going to repeat back, paraphrase back to with them, so they know that you're interested and you're listening to what they have to say. So this is the video I'm going to show you. And what I want you to watch in this video, I'm not going to show you the actual police shooting, and sometimes this is a little hard to hear because this is a dashboard cam. So this officer responded, I believe this is in Arizona. There's the full video out there if you're interested in watching the full video. But the officer stops a vehicle. There's about 5 or 6 people in the car. They're all known gang members. They're all known to be violent and carry weapons and sell drugs. In fact, the person he shoots had methamphetamine in his system, high levels of it. He stops the car. The person in the back seat does not show his hands. He ultimately shoots and kills the guy in the back. Takes it from the part where his partner gets on scene and he has what I call an extreme reaction. And this is going to tie in all those stress reactions we talked about, including the incapacitating ones. And then what I want you to watch is what his physical, cognitive, emotional state is. And then what his colleague does kind of goes through some of those 7 C's with him. And just so you know, this is not his first shoot. This is his second. And when he went to court, he was found not guilty of any charges, just that up ahead of time.
Yeah. Stay by you, man. Good. Thanks, Trail. I own you. Come with me. Yeah. Hey. Stand up. You good. You good. Hey, are you hurt? Mm-mm. Okay, sit up. Sit up. Come on, man. Sit up. Sit up, man. Come on, brother. Come on, brother. I got him back here. Look, he's come over there. Right here. I got you. I got you. Come on, brother. I got you. You okay? Yeah. I got you. I got you. Okay? I got you, man. I got you. You okay? Where's your Brad, I got you. I got you. I got you. I'm leaning forward. I got you. hanging. Yeah, no. Can I help you? All right. Oh, kind of. I got you. I thought he was going to pull a gun on me. Maybe he was. Maybe he was. Jesus Christ. You survived. Got you, man. Turn on out. All right. All right. I don't know what's going on. Deep breath. All right. Get yourself together. We got it. You're not hurt. I'm not hurt. I'm not hurt. We checked you over. Yeah. We didn't find any blood. No. We didn't find anything that would try to hurt you. We got it. You want to get out of here? No, not yet. You let me know when you're ready. I'll get you out of here. So that's fine. That seat's cleared out. Got you, right? I'm calling her open, but I'm ready to go. All right, let's go. All right. Yeah, let's get you out of here.
Okay, so what did you see with the officer that did the shooting? And we'll go back to the 7 C's here. That followed on this. Let's talk about the officer's response. What was his physical response? What's that? What was his physiological reaction to the incident? Yep, so he's hyperventilating. What else did you observe? Crying. When he walked up to the car, you kind of couldn't see it, but he actually fell to the ground. He was on the ground. It was kind of hard to hear, but he actually says, I don't know what's going on, whether it meant he don't know what's going on with his own feelings or what's going on around him, but he mentioned, I don't know what's going on. Fear. He was fearful of his life. He thought he was going to die. He thought the guy was going to pull a gun, so he was feeling fear. Grief. Kind of a little bit of loss of awareness of what's going on around him. Following the 7 C's, what did his colleagues do for him? So I think his partner did a good job of saying over and over again. What did he say over and over again? We got you. We got you. We got you. They removed him got him to a safe place. So the shooting happened way beyond the railroad tracks, and so obviously the officer cannot leave the scene right now, but they took him away from the incident. So he disengaged him from the incident, got him into a safe environment away from where he could. Calmed him down, he did ask, can I call? I think he was asking, can I call your wife? And he said, no, not now. So he did ask, so we try to connect him with somebody who may actually get him some additional support. And obviously they checked him, they took him away. What I thought was kind of funny, there's a couple officers that walk over there with their flashlight and then leave. It's like they didn't know what to say. But he also his colleague kept physical contact with him. He kept his hand on his back and saying, got you, we got you, we got you. Kept him informed. They didn't find a gun on the guy, and he was telling them, well, we didn't find anything. So he was honest, but he was keeping informed of what was happening on the scene, so he was up to date. So remember I talked about we get frustrated when we don't get all the information. So he was keeping him oriented, he was keeping him calm, using a calm voice, keeping physical contact with him, and letting him have that stress reaction. I can promise you that when I started in public safety and law enforcement, that they would have all looked at him and said, what are you crying about? Get back to work. This scene would have never happened like this. So once again, identify any hazards, dangers, obstacles, or any barriers. Ensure that the responder is safe, and direct any concerns to the safety officer or their deputies. So if there's any concerns, like if they're in a serious crisis where they're just completely incapacitated, they may need some crisis intervention right then. Some things that just to ask that you may not be aware of that would help: are you thirsty or hungry? So when I know you guys have a CISM policy. If you have a Sentinel event, they do a mandatory CISM. So when our CISM team went out in Pinellas County, we understood that a lot of times you just really want to get back to the station or get back to work and get a shower or get something to eat or drink. So we would bring snacks or something to drink. So don't forget to be kind and say, they may not want it, but at least offer it to them. Once again, you want to keep them calm and oriented, just like the example in that video. Are there responders experiencing signs of physical or behavior distress? It requires immediate attention. Obviously, this officer, it was an extreme case. So loud. So you think he did? I think he did a good job of stabilizing the situation. Obviously, he couldn't remove the officer from the scene, but he took him away, and then he realized that this officer was experiencing extreme response. Identify any immediate needs or concerns. Connect them with the right person. Some other questions you might want to say is, have you ever experienced these kinds of reactions before? I kind of like to leave the word feelings out. Have you ever experienced these kind of reactions before? There's some questions that were set with the CISM team that we would ask consistently. Our first statement would be, whenever we had a debriefing, would be, if you're having a reaction, these are normal reactions to an abnormal event. And when we went through the debriefing, we would never ask what your feelings were or how you were emotionally feeling. It was very specific questions like, what was your role? What did you do? What did you see? If there was one thing you could change to be different, what would that be? And if you can name one thing that went right, what would that be? So they were not designed to talk about feelings or talk about the emotional part. It was designed to talk about the call. And organically, by asking those questions, those conversations would take place. So once again, those are just some tools to give you to ask those questions. And you want to use the information that you gather, whether you know the person or don't know the person, you know the incident, whatever, to intervene based on their response. So I'm going to give you a different version, a different extreme that happened to me. This was not something that happened in the beginning of my career. This happened towards the end of my career. Being on a CISM team for 20 years, being somebody who's taken the train the trainer on stress first aid, you would think that I could personally recognize something in my own self. But, and my department has taken this class, and my district chief, which you guys call battalion chiefs, he was my district chief, big old crusty guy, had a big heart, tried to do the right thing, was really awkward in these situations. So we had a pediatric drowning, and there was some really weird circumstances to this drowning. And we got Ross back on the kid, and we took him to the hospital. And here I was in the hospital door, passing off patient care, and then I'm standing with my EPCR, and I can't disengage from that door. I was stuck to that door. Door was open, watching the nurses and doctor work on this kid. So my district chief, Bob, great guy, kind heart, he tried to do the right thing. He responded to the hospital, which I tremendously appreciated. But this is what he did to me. He came up to me in front of the door, put his hand on me, and said, "You're all right, right? You're all right, Penny, right?" So following that 7 C's and what you saw there, what could he have done a little differently? So he made a statement. "You're all right, right?" Because he didn't want me to say no. Because if I said no, then he's like, "Oh no, what do I do now?" But what else? Yeah. I could not disengage from that kid. And I was in, not the extreme crisis that you see here. I wasn't crying and I wasn't, sweating or falling down or hyperventilating, but I still could not disengage. So a couple things he could have did. You're a captain, battalion captain. So what would you have done differently? What could you have said differently?
Take me away from the scene.
How would you got me away from that door?
Let's
Go to the EMS room, right? Hey, yeah. Let's go get a snack. Let's go to the EMS room. EMS rooms usually have good snacks, right? Or, hey, let's get cleaned up and get back to the station. We'll take you out of the service for a little bit and let's talk about it. And then don't ask that question. You're right? Just ask those questions like, can I get you something to drink? What happened in that call? What did you do in that call? There's people on scene in that call who didn't even remember who was all on scene because because we've worked mutual aid or automatic aid with our neighboring department, Palm Harbor. So Palm Harbor responded with us. And several weeks later, I was talking about this call to somebody else, and he goes, "I was on that call." I'm like, "I didn't remember you." He goes, "I don't remember you being on that call either." That was how intense this call was. So it's amazing how, even though if you're knowledgeable about this, you still have to rely on other people to say, that's not how one should be reacting. We must take her away from the scene, let her decompress, and let's talk about it. And just so you know that the kid came back a week later, they visited the fire station with no deficits. The kid was completely fine, so that was a good win for us. But I came home that next morning, my husband looked at me and said he had a bad call. Yeah, I did. You want to talk about it? No, I'm going for a run. And that was my coping mechanism, was going for a run. Okay, once again, you want to connect people with whoever, whether it's a family member, clergy, chaplain, another first responder who's got has had like experiences. And once again, some of the questions you could say is, would you like to take a break and call? Can I introduce you to somebody who can further help you? And then provide the responder with information about stress reaction and coping. And obviously, with this officer in the extreme case, that was not the right time to say, hey, maybe you should go get a beer. That's, not the right time after the incident, maybe 24 hours or whatever after the incident. Then follow up after you check on him. It's important to follow up maybe the next shift or call him at home. And then maybe give him some nice, helpful hints and tips of what to do to help cope. And there are services, and I'm going to go over a few of those services that you can refer them out. That gives you some options. And so one of those options are your SISM team. I met Larry he's a battalion chief from Palm Beach County. He's the head of the SISM team. Great guy. They just not only do debriefings and diffusings, they do one-on-ones. They can refer you to a fire chaplain, or they can refer you to mental health professionals that are on their SISM team that is certified in trauma. You have your EAP. In Tampa, then there's other places that carry this same type of retreat, but there is a Franciscan Center. It's a couple-day retreat that specializes in post-traumatic stress for only law enforcement and fire and EMS only. There's UCF Restores, and that specializes in research on PTSD and some resilience and preventative training as well. You have the IAFF Center of Excellence. One of my friends who had a drinking problem, his department sponsored him through this, and it's an in-house rehab center, and he said it was the best thing that he ever did, changed his life, stopped drinking, and got back on track with work, with his job. There is the UF Health First Responders Recovery Program. that is also an inpatient as well as an outpatient center, and also provides support groups. This is probably the best resource for first responders out there. It's FireStrong. There's a phone number. I'll give this information to you as well. They have peer support from all over the country that volunteers. You can call them 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, text or phone call. So if you're not comfortable with going to your own mental health provider, or you don't want to use AAP, or you don't want to use a CISM team, and you want to ensure that you're completely anonymous, they have a great list of resources. If you choose, you want to give back and become a peer support, you can also volunteer to be a peer support member, a part of this group as well. So once again, you need to find whatever stress relief. Fishing's up there. Exercise or spending time with family. When Mary and I did this, we made this big, huge wall with little Post-its of what everybody was grateful for. And I didn't want to do that for you guys. It's only the two of you. Didn't want to make you feel uncomfortable. But everybody posted these wonderful things of what made them feel good about, what they did to refill their cup, or what were they grateful. And the majority of people put their family, their pet, lots of fishing, paddleboarding, but it was really great. The majority was family, so that's really super important. So if you don't have any questions, that's the end, and I'll turn off the recording.